What is going on, traders? In this video, we're going to be talking about a top. Is the top coming in? And if so, how soon will it happen? So right now, we're looking at the weekly time frame on the NQ. And for those of you who have been watching this YouTube channel for quite some time, we have been here before. We've seen this before. We've seen this exact trend, this exact channel before, right? Where we pretty much broke out of above this channel. And then I was pretty much essentially calling the top, where I was saying that if we just so happen to roll back below this trend line here, keep in mind we're on a weekly time frame, so this is a weekly trend. If we break back below it, then I believe the top is in and we're going to break further down. And that's exactly what happened. And we were talking about that for quite some time. Well, now we're seeing a situation where we're heading back towards this trend. So, yes, I do think we're going to see more upside this upcoming week. I'm truly bullish on the market this week, or at least the next week or two. But once we get to the top of this trend, what can happen? And in case you don't know, we're looking at around 20,500, 20,800. My bet is on 20,800 being probably one of the highest points we go. We can obviously go higher than that, but right now I'm looking at 20,800. Minimum, we're looking at 20,500 on the NQ. And so you guys know that, I'm not making this stuff up. We rejected here, we rejected here, we broke out, and then we rolled back in, and then we essentially just broke down, right? And so we're looking at some type of double bottom here where we have a bottom here and another bottom here, right? And it's not yet confirmed because we haven't broken the neckline, which I don't think will be an issue. I definitely think we're going to break this neckline at around, we'll say 20,100 just to be safe. But once we break that neckline, can we go higher? And I guess we have to look at everything else in order to really determine that. Now, obviously, there is a potential to go higher, but how likely is that? And so, in order to really answer that, we have to look at everything else. And so, we look at the ES, right? We look at the ES, and we're pretty much looking at the same exact scenario. And again, we're looking at the weekly time frame. We rejected here, we rejected here, we rejected here, rejection here, and now we're heading back up there. And this is again, we talked about this before when the last top was in, or short-term top, I should say, was in, and then we broke down. And now we're heading back towards the top of this channel, or I guess the bottom of this channel, where we can see a move all the way towards 5,900, 6,000 max I'm looking at before we actually start to break down and possibly retest the top of this falling wedge or broadening wedge pattern, and possibly, if possible, we head, higher if that's the case. Okay. So that is possible. Or if we just so happen to roll back below this pattern, then chances are the top is in and then we're just going to break down. And how far we break down is really up in the air, but it is important to note that we do have a lot of fair value gaps all the way in the 4,000s range. Now, how that happens, I can't say for sure. Maybe, I don't know, COVID 3.0 comes in or some war happens, who knows? But I do imagine that these will have to be mitigated between this year and next year. But we'll talk about that if we get close to that point. And fair value gaps have a high chance of being mitigated. So we'll have to see what happens. But again, I am bullish, right? I'm bullish short term. I do think we have a lot more upside to go. I think this pretty much proves that point, right? But once we get up here, it's very important to have an idea on what can potentially happen. And so if we continue to head higher without actually retesting the top of this broadening wedge, then there is a high chance that we could reject from the top of this trend right here, right? This trend, this weekly trend. Okay, so there's a high chance. Now, if we just so happen to retest, maybe this week we just, this week is bearish for whatever reason, which I don't think is going to be the case. But let's say that does happen, we retest the top of this broadening wedge, then I think we're going to make a lot more room for way more upside at that point. But I'm not really counting on this situation, but it is a situation to keep in mind, right? And so that's what I'm looking at in regards to the ES. We look at the US 100. And everything is pretty much lining up. We're looking at the weekly time frame. Again, we rejected here, we rejected here, we broke out, we rolled back in, and now we have another double bottom as well. And then we're somewhat trying to break this neckline. Okay, and so again, just like we saw in the ES and Q, we have plenty of more room to the upside where we can be heading as high as about, I would say, 20,300, 20,500 range before we potentially see some type of rejection. And again, if we just so happen to keep going without retesting this falling wedge or broadening wedge pattern, whichever one you want to call it, either one is not really wrong. You can if we continue to head higher without retesting it, then we could be looking at a topping process up here soon, and then maybe form some type of double top where we have a top here and then a top here forming, and then we break down, come down here to retest it around 19,200, if not more or less. Or we roll back into this pattern and we break down and start heading towards these fair value gaps and start mitigating, them, right? And so it's important to note, and one thing is really important to note is that we do have, big tech earnings coming, right? And I think if anything was going to be the catalyst for a huge sell-off, I would imagine big tech earnings would be the cause of a sell-off. And that's what I'm betting on. You guys know that I'm big on earnings. I think earnings is the main thing that the market cares about, and it helps you look more towards the future, right? And so right now we're in a place of uncertainty with elections coming up. And if anything was going to give us some type of certainty prior to that point, I would imagine it would be big tech earnings, and that would help decide what direction the market goes. So if we just so happen to, hit the top of these channels before we get like some real big tech earnings such as Nvidia, Apple, so on and so forth, then I do imagine that when those earnings come in, since we've been pricing in a lot of, good news such as rate cuts and so on and so forth, and we're seeing like Apple pump and a lot of these big tech names pump to the upside, like Meta and so on and so forth. I imagine we're pricing in a lot of good news, and therefore, once earnings comes around for these names, we could see a huge sell-off, thus bringing the market down, right? And so that's what I'm looking at, or that's my thought process. I think if any time was going to be a sell-off, it would be around big tech earnings. And so we look at the triple Qs, and we're pretty much seeing the same thing. We have this rising wedge pattern on the weekly time frame. We rejected here, we broke out, broke down below. You guys get the process, right? And so what's important is that if we are heading to the top of this channel, which I think we are since we roll back in, you guys know how I am when how what we talk about when we say what happens when we roll back into a pattern, whether it's to the upside and to the downside. If we roll back into a pattern, no matter if it's a bull flag, bear flag, rising wedge, falling wedge, whatever the pattern is, chances are you're going to continue in that direction. And therefore, we have a piercing pattern here. So this is a very bullish pattern on the weekly time frame. And so I think triple Qs is going to head towards the 490s, 498 range before we potentially see some type of sell off. And if we roll back out of this pattern again and just so happen to want to retest the top of this broadening wedge, then chances are we're going to head much lower. Lower. Okay, so that is the move that I am looking at on the triple Qs. I think we're going to have more upside. I think we have a lot more upside to go. I think we're going to head towards that 498. Maybe we see 500. You guys know my all-time high targets. If we just so happen to see a huge like melt up or breakout, I think it's going to be 510 this year. I think we're going to see 510 this year or beginning of next year. So historically, the market is very bullish for elections. So for the next, 2, 3 months, I do think we're going to start heading towards all-time highs. Now, short term, if we just so happen to hit the top, like top of this channel here, and we get here before we start really seeing some big tech earnings coming in, then I would really be cautious. Okay, I would be cautious because I think that we priced in a lot of good data, and chances are a lot of these big names are pricing in possibly good earnings. Okay, I wouldn't say surprise beats, but I think they're just pricing in okay-ish earnings, right? I don't think Apple is going to do great for its earnings. It's been showing signs for quite some time that it's just not going to do great for its earnings. Unless they introduce something innovative, I don't see Apple really doing anything crazy for its earnings. And Apple does have a history of running up into its earnings, right? And so we look at the SPY. And so the SPY is looks really bullish, right? We talked about this for quite some time, where we have us an ascending triangle. We Let's actually go to the weekly time frame first, but we've been pretty bullish for quite some time. Now, I will say that SPY is the only one that broke out of its channel, right? We rejected here, rejected here. We tried to break out, rejected here, but you're seeing the same thing where we broke out, we broke down, and now we're breaking back above. So the SPY is showing signs. I mean, it's already at all-time highs, right? But it's showing signs that it wants to definitely head higher in comparison to, everything else in regards to all-time highs. And so we look at the daily time frame. Let's actually get rid of this trend here. And so we look at the daily time frame, and I've shown you guys this plenty of times, but if you're new to the channel, we have us an ascending triangle. And this is pretty much what I was saying right here, I truly believe is a bear trap. I think it was an obvious bear trap. You're free to check the past two three videos where even the thumbnail was saying, "Hey, this is an obvious bear trap," and I went into detail on why I think it's a bear trap. And so, bears got extremely trapped. I mean, they got destroyed here, right? We gapped up and then we just continued higher that day or next 2 days or so, right? And so we have this ascending triangle. We have a low here, higher low here, flat top. We broke out, and I think SPY is going to head much higher. Right now, my target for the SPY is about 575. I think the SPY is going to start heading towards 575. 580 is my minimum all-time high target, and then 600 will be my max all-time high target for the SPY. So I do think the SPY is going to see those numbers sometime this week, if not the following week. I definitely think we're going to see 575 at minimum, and then 580 we could see this week. Now 600, I think that's just a little too much to ask for, but who knows? Jerome Powell speaks this week. Maybe he'll, cause that to happen. But regardless, SPY is looking great. I think that's the point I'm trying to get across here is that SPY is looking extremely bullish right now. I really can't say when the top will come in, but I don't imagine the SPY going too much higher than 600 this year. All right. Maybe it can. I just don't see it right now. But if it does, then that's fine as well. And so we look at the semiconductor ETFs real quick, and they're showing somewhat of the same signs, right? And we're looking at an SMH daily time frame. Let's go to the weekly time frame just to make sure. So yeah, we go to the weekly time frame on SMH, and there's one more thing I want to show you guys on triple Qs, but we'll just double back to that when we can. But as you guys can see, we bounced here, we broke down, we rejected the trend line once again, and now we're heading back up there. And so we look at SMH and we're looking at the weekly time frame. Once again, we see this fair value gap that needs to be mitigated all the way within the 260s range. So I do think SMH is going to start heading there. Um, and that will help semiconductors go higher. I think Nvidia is going to start heading higher. If not, if it does head lower, I would imagine it's going to bounce off 113. We'll talk about Nvidia in a bit. But regardless, SMH does look like it wants to go higher. But despite that, we still have this head and shoulders pattern that's showing here, right? And again, I want to make this clear. Head and shoulders patterns are not confirmed until you break the neckline. And the neckline is all the way in the 200s, so it's not nothing to worry about quite yet. But if we do just so happen to break down, and we start, pretty much breaking this um, neckline for the head and shoulders pattern, then we're definitely going to start mitigating these fair value gaps on a weekly time frame. But right now, SMH looks pretty bullish. I think it's just going to head higher from this point. Thus, therefore, carrying semiconductors higher. MU has earnings this week, so I think that would help pretty much carry things higher in regards to semiconductors. And then we possibly see some type of sell off from that point. We'll see. But SMH looks pretty bullish. And if I was to say, if we're talking about a topping process, then I imagine we're going to hit this trend, mitigate this fair value gap, and possibly see some type of sell off. I believe on a daily time frame, there is a gap to the upside as well. Yeah, here it is. So there's a gap all the way in the 270s range, between 260 270 range. So that's something to look out for too in regards to SMH. And so we look at another semiconductor ETF. We look at SOXX, and you pretty much are getting the same deal here, right? You go to the weekly time frame, you zoom out, and you guys see that we've been within this channel here on the weekly time frame. We broke below the channel, right? The rising channel, and then we broke below it, and now it looks like we're heading back towards it. Not only that, on a weekly time frame, we have an inverted hammer pattern, which is a very bullish pattern. And so I imagine SOXX, sorry, is going to head much higher from here, where we could see a move all the way up to the 250s, 240 range before we start seeing any signs of a rejection here. And so it's still important to note that we still have a head and shoulders pattern here. Your neckline is all the way at the 190s range, somewhere around there. And then you're looking to mitigate these fair value gaps all the way in the 180s, 170s range. So something to look out for. Um, Point being is that I'm pretty bullish on semiconductors. I think semiconductors are going to head much higher within the next week or two. We'll see. But right now, all I'm seeing is signs of more upside in regards to the overall market. But again, if we're talking about a top, I will definitely pay attention to these weekly channels and I'm showing you guys these weekly trend lines and I'm showing you guys across the board because I imagine once we get there, that once we get there and when we get there, depending on the timing that we get there, let's say we get there before we actually get big tech earnings, I think that's a sign that big tech earnings is going to have a pretty much negative effect on the market where we could start seeing a sell off or they can be the cause of a massive sell-off. But again, we'll have to see. So we look at Bitcoin, and I want you guys to like be clear because I have people joining the Discord thinking that we trade crypto in the Discord. Crypto we used to, but I'm only doing this by myself. So focusing on crypto, forex, and stocks all at once by myself is just not ideal for me. So I chose to, stick to stocks, and that's just that. Okay, so I do apologize if that's not something you're looking forward to, but just make sure just because I'm talking about Bitcoin, I'm only talking about Bitcoin because, people look at Bitcoin, but I'm mostly talking about Bitcoin because there's stocks and ETFs that fall under Bitcoin. So I just want to make that clear here. But in regards to Bitcoin, I told you guys about this. We go down to the daily time frame. We look at this rising three method. I mean, it was a beautiful call, guys. I couldn't call this any better. We broke out. I think Bitcoin is going to start heading towards 65K. Highest I'm looking at is about 67, 68K, and then we'll have to see what happens from there. But pretty bullish on Bitcoin. I have no reason to be bearish right now. I think Bitcoin is just going to continue to head higher. Can it head higher than that? We'll see. If it breaks above 6 to 74, 75K, then obviously we're looking at all-time highs. And so we look at a stock like Coin. I think Coin is going to continue to head higher. I showed you guys this in the last two videos. We see this falling wedge pattern, and it broke out of this falling wedge pattern. Coin looks absolutely diabolical. I think it's going to start heading towards the 200s, and we'll have to see what happens. But I'll be looking to trade coin. It's just nothing is showing on the options chain right now. And if it doesn't, then that's fine. If nothing pops up, then I'll just miss out on the play. But I'm not trying to force anything. It looks beautiful. It looks great. But we'll see what happens. But this breakout looks absolutely beautiful. And if we're talking about Bitcoin heading higher to 65, 70, 65, 68K, then I definitely think coin is obviously going to follow along and start mitigating these fair value gaps to the upside. And so we look at a stock like, let's look at Meta. So Meta's in an interesting spot as well. Meta on a weekly time frame. So on a weekly time frame, Meta broke above this weekly trend, and so I'm not interested in touching Meta. Um, Honestly, I'm just not. It broke out its ascending triangle as well on a daily time frame, but I mean, you rejected here, you rejected here, you rejected here, and right now Meta is pretty much closed above this trend. So I think Meta is just going to continue to head higher. How high is really up in the air, but I imagine it's going to head towards 580 minimum, and we'll see what happens from there. When do they have earnings? Let's see. So they don't have earnings all the way to October 23rd. So this thing could just keep pumping. But yeah, I just don't see any signs of Meta trying to sell off or any signs of Meta potentially selling off. And when I say sell off, I mean like anything like major, like a huge drop or anything. I mean, sure, it can maybe fill this gap at around 550, 548 range, but other than that, I think Meta is just going to continue to go ballistic if the market obviously allows for that. So we look at Apple, right? And so Apple looks great. Now, I will say that Apple is rejecting this fair value gap. It pretty much cleared it. Well, it filled this gap here, so it's really up in the air on how high Apple can go from this point. So we'll see. You could say this is an inverse head and shoulders pattern. So you have your head here, another shoulder here. So Apple does decide to break out, then obviously 250 would be my target. 240, 250 range would be my target. But Apple looks good. I have nothing. We pretty much called the bottom here in one of our videos where I said Apple could bounce from here, and that's exactly what happened. So, yeah, shout out to you if you took Apple. Um, Nvidia. And so Nvidia is in an interesting spot, and our AI bot within our Discord continues to call Nvidia, call trades like consistently on Nvidia. And so I didn't mark it, but there is a symmetrical triangle here. Let's actually see if we can map it out. So we have a symmetrical triangle. It's not going to be perfect because I'm like rushing through it. But regardless, NVIDIA has a symmetrical triangle and it looks pretty, it looks really clean. If NVIDIA can break this trend right here, then NVIDIA is definitely going to head higher. I think it could head as high as about 127, but obviously my short-term target will be 123. And then if we break above that, then we're looking at a move to 127. But I really don't have anything bad to say about NVIDIA. I mean, worst case scenario, you see a move towards 113 before it goes higher. But if we're talking about SMH and SOXX looking really bullish, then obviously NVIDIA is going to follow along. We look at SMCI. And so I'm really bullish on SMCI. We're actually in a trade on SMCI. We're really good in profit right now. I think SMCI is going to just continue to head higher from here. I see no reason not to. 465, if it breaks above 465, then this thing is going to absolutely take off. You see a lot of fair value gaps to the upside, all the way up to the 800s. Now, I can't say for sure if that's going to happen, but I do think SMCI can see at least 530, 550 sometime this week, if not the following week. So we'll see. But SMCI looks great. I have nothing bad to really say about SMCI besides it's extremely volatile and kind of annoying. Google. So Google has a falling wedge pattern. Our Discord bot continues to alert this thing. Um, it alerts it a lot. Okay, so Google, Nvidia, has been alerting a lot, but you see this falling wedge pattern. You broke out of the falling wedge pattern. Google reclaimed the 200 daily SMA as well, so that's a great sign as well. Let me actually see. Yeah, so the Discord bot has been calling a lot of Google Play. So you got like this 162.5 call for September 20th. That's already passed, but this was very much deep in profit. You have another big play here. You have 165 calls for October 18th, 2024. And so I think this is a very solid play. I definitely think Google is going to head higher. But you have a lot of calls coming in for Google. I believe there's a lot of golden sweep plays for Google as well. Let me see if I just saw it, but it skipped up or down. But yeah, you have estimate calls, 240 calls for November 1st. You have AMD puts. I wouldn't take this serious just yet, but AMD has been pumping, so we'll see. You have a lot of calls coming in. I mean, you have Apple calls. This is for September 2025, but still, I mean, you have Apple calls coming in. You have Nvidia 116 calls coming in, another 116, another one. So you have a lot of calls coming in. Here it is. You have a Google 165 call coming in for November 15th. So if you want access to our Discord bot, it's really good at alerting trades. Has like a very high win rate. Um, Discord members seem to like it, so we're just gonna keep rocking with it. But otherwise, if you want access to a Discord link is in the description below. But overall point here is that if we're not seeing a top come in soon. Okay, that's my point here. I don't think I guess soon is all about perspective, but we're not seeing a topping process at least come in for this week, or I would even go as far as to say the following week of September. It looks like it can come closer to October, much closer to October, if not, soon, a little bit sooner. But regardless, things are looking pretty bullish. I mean, we're looking across the board and things are looking very bullish. We still have a lot more upside if we're going by what we're talking about in regards to how much space we have to the top of this channel here. We're looking at the NQ. But if we have as much space as we are saying on the weekly time frame, or as far as this weekly trend goes, then I imagine that we're just going to continue to head higher and that this week is going to continue to be bullish, and I just have nothing to say in regards to downside. I mean, everything just looks really bullish. So we have a lot of room. Okay, we have a lot of space on the NQ, the ES, SMH. We see SPY breaking above the ascending triangle. The measured move for that ascending triangle is about 580, 575 range. But things are looking really good. And I mean, we can actually do this in real time so you guys can have an understanding. But you just measure the open and close of the ascending triangle, you bring the measurement to the breaking point, and there you have it. 618 will be the measure move. I don't think we're gonna go there anytime soon, but you never know. But right now, I'm looking at 580 and 600 being our all-time high targets, and then we'll go from there. So hopefully you guys got something out this video. There was a lot to process, but again, I don't think there's anything to worry about in regards to a crash or a correction happening anytime soon. But I do think that the potential is there to happen towards earnings season or closer to big tech earnings. So we'll see what happens. Other than that, that's all I have. Discord link is in the description below. Until the next video, traders, have a good one.